On today's episode of the show, the Louisville defense is going to take that next step forward and improve, thanks largely in part due to promising linebacker play. We'll break it down on today's episode of Locked On Louisville.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Card Nation, what is going on? Welcome into this Saturday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Football is getting closer, but we're still in the dog days of summer. The sports have stopped sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. As always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast, free and available on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team every day. On today's episode of the show, we're previewing the linebacker position ahead of the 2024 college football season for the Louisville Cardinals. A lot of promise across the group. We'll begin with the middle linebackers. TJ Quinn is going to establish himself as one of the best in the ACC. Stanquan Clark ready to take that next step. We'll then go over to the star position, the outside linebacker spot, where Ben Perry will continue to be a star at the star. Antonio Watts will also play a huge role for the team. And then we'll also discuss a little bit of the quality depth. TJ Capers, Jurriente Davis, Dan Foster, etc. So a lot of great, promising players to discuss on the show today. And I was extremely excited to really dive into the linebacker preview because this is an intriguing one for me, because when you break it down position by position between last year and this year, you could say that linebacker was the spot that lost the least amount of players, both due to the transfer portal and to the NFL draft. You did lose Keith Brown to the portal, which he didn't really play that large of a role last year, which kind of surprised me. But you did lose Jalen Alderman. That was the big loss in spring ball. Alderman had a pretty solid bounce back year, and ultimately it sucks. Or when you lose him, but it is what it is, because at the end of the day, you do have the ability to replace his level of production. And it could be argued that Alderman might not have been the starter this upcoming season. It might have been a spot that Stanquan Clark took over. Now, it depends on who you talk to. Will tell you different things. But regardless, it was a tough loss. However, this linebacker core is going to take the next step. It's going to take a leap. And it starts with TJ Quinn. TJ Quinn was a guy that I discussed in length at the end of the offseason last year as being a guy that I'm like, ooh, yes, this player is going to really have a breakout season. And I think breakout season sort of was an understatement. When his number was called, well, let me just put it into perspective. He had 20 total tackles combined in his first two seasons. In 2023, he had 91. So, I mean, exponentially grew those numbers, had 2 pass deflections, had his first, half sack. He had his first interception. So he was all over the field. The 6'1", 230-pound native from Valdosta, Georgia, was a huge part of that Cardinals defense. Now, I know that early on, the unit looked fantastic. And then towards the end of the year, when you started to play teams with better skill positions, you struggled a little bit. But that doesn't take away from the step forward that TJ Quinn took. And I think he respectively could take the next step forward. However, how does that look statistically? Because he already had 91 total tackles last season. So to suggest that he's going to raise that number, I don't know. Could he? Yeah, of course he could. But it's interesting because that is a tough number to get back to. I think he's going to be very close to that number. I'm just not sure if you can tie, the prospect of him taking another leap to the statistical numbers. I think that Quinn could be better in coverage. just continue to make an impact, potentially be sort of that tertiary pass rusher, situational pass rusher, which I'm not necessarily so sure as being his role. But you could tell that the game slowed down for him, as it does for linebackers that spend some time in a program. Don't forget that TJ Quinn was a safety coming out of high school. Jalen Alderman was a safety coming out of high school. Antonio Watts, Ben Perry. One thing that Scott Satterfield and company liked to do was recruit safety hybrid players that could transform their body and step into that linebacker role. And that's what we saw TJ Quinn do. So don't forget that as great as he looked last season, Quinn still is relatively new to the linebacker spot, especially the middle linebacker spot, which he'll play that middle. And then I believe Stanquan Clark will probably play the weak side. But TJ Quinn, being one of the ACC's best returning linebackers, I think that he is going to be one of the big-time leaders of this team. You have Ashton Gillotte, you have Quincy Riley, you have MJ Griffin. I think TJ Quinn also belongs in that conversation, and he's going to have he's going to have a money year. This is going to be a year where he has a chance to make himself a lot of money in the NFL draft. And moving forward, I think that, man, the sky is the limit for this guy, and I'm really excited. This is one of the guys that I'm looking to see how he takes that next step to where he could be one of the next great Louisville linebackers. And you have that play alongside of Stanquan Clark, who I think is poised for his respective breakout season. He only had 15 total tackles this past year, which not terrible for a true freshman. He had one forced fumble as well. Had probably his best game against Indiana, had the forced fumble against Murray State, had multiple tackles against Miami, NC State, you name it. But he's going to take that next step. He's going to continue to get acclimated with the system that Ron English is running, and he's going to, once again, like I said with TJ Quinn, the game's going to slow down for him, and he's going to be able to react quicker. Let's call it how it is. Clark is, in my opinion, a top 2 most talented player on this defense. Talent alone, he's top 2 along with TJ Capers. You could probably put Ashton Gillotte there, but pure talent coming out of high school, I think that Stanquan Clark deserves to be in that conversation. Top 3 at the worst. I mean, he was a high 4-star guy for a reason. Brian Smith, the Locked On Podcast national recruiting analyst, was completely caught off guard that no Florida team, prioritized him as early as they should have. And he found it wild that they let him escape the state. Now, that does happen because of the sheer amount of talented prospects, but Stanquan Clark is the real deal. So I think that with his ability to cover sideline to sideline, I'm looking to see how he's going to improve in terms of defending the pass. Is he going to drop back in coverage some more? Can he seal off that edge? That's sort of the main thing that I'm wondering with this linebacker core, is that they have to continually show that they can defend the rush really well, but they also have to be able to be solid, technical tacklers. And I think that they can be that. I think that this is one of the more slept-on linebacker groups in the ACC. It has the potential to be fantastic. I mean, TJ Quinn is one of the best, in my opinion. And then Stanquan Clark is going to solidify himself as a really, really good player, and one that people in the ACC start to talk about. So you have 2 projected starters. I think TJ Quinn is probably I think that he's a solidified starter. I think Stanquan Clark is probably a penciled-in starter. I'm not necessarily so sure if that is for certain, because there are some other guys that we'll talk about in the last segment that could compete for playing time that I definitely think could be in the mix. But ultimately, you have 2 players that hit really hard. They're vicious. They have violent pursuit. Strong guys. I mean, 6'1", 230 pounds. Stanquan, 6'3", 230 pounds. Guys that can, I think, both defend the rush really well and also be able to drop back in coverage. I'm interested to see what that looks like, with the star position and everything. But it's a great start. And if Louisville's defense wants to take that next step, which everyone believes that they will, a lot of this will depend on linebacker play. Can they contain mobile quarterbacks as well? That was another issue that the Cardinals had, was Louisville didn't really contain mobile quarterbacks. Guys ran all over Louisville in scrambling situations. When plays broke down, they made the Cardinals pay. I mean, look at the last half of the season. It was not the prettiest sight. Now, there were times where that didn't happen. Duke, Virginia Tech, Boston College. But go back and watch the Virginia game. Go back and watch the USC game. Florida State. Miami. The list goes on. So Louisville has to be better at containing the opposing quarterback in multiple different situations. They have to be able to show that they can tackle sideline to sideline and play fast. That's one thing, is I think Stanquan Clark plays fast. TJ Quinn plays fast. You have to have speed on your defense to be able to get to that next level, and I think that they have that. So, like I said, I think they'll defend the rush really well. It's going to depend on, can they play well in coverage? And a lot of that sort of gets overshadowed by the other linebacker position that we're going to talk about. That is the star spot, the outside linebacker spot, where Ben Perry continues to be a star at the start. You get what I'm saying. We'll break it down and also discuss Antonio Watts being one of the more slept-on players on this defense coming up on the next segment of Locked on Louisville. Today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. And before we head into the next segment, once again, want to remind you about the opportunity you have at a free 24/7 sports streaming channel, Locked On Sports Today. It's a channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, covering your team every day. And thank you for making Locked on Louisville your first listen of the day. Hope everyone's having a great weekend. We're getting closer and closer and closer to the college football season. A little over a month away. It's painfully close, and this month is going to drag. But nonetheless, that's why we are having our position preview series. We got some other fantastic things coming up that I'm really, really excited to have you all listen to. But nonetheless, let's continue to preview the linebacker position. I broke the previews up into sort of edge rushers and linebackers. So in this preview, we're talking about the star position, which is that outside linebacker, sort of safety hybrid role, which was called the card in the last regime. In that defense under Scott Satterfield, Rajay Burns played that spot. The list goes on. I won't go too much into detail, but that spot has been held for the past couple of seasons by Ben Perry. Ben Perry will be entering his fourth season with the program. Each and every season, he has produced more and more. He's gotten better and better. He doesn't have an interception to his name yet, but the 6'3" defensive back / linebacker hybrid from Chicago, Illinois, has been a constant level of production for this defense. He started out in 2021. He only had 4 tackles. Broke out onto the scene at 22, had 43. 56 this past year with a career high 4 pass deflections. He also recorded his first sack. And I know before last season, he had entered the portal and then took his name out of the portal. That's huge because Ben Perry is only going to continue to get better. Again, same thing with TJ Quinn. Don't forget here that Ben Perry was a safety turned into a linebacker. And one aspect of that gets overlooked is that you have to transform your body as well. So I was really excited by the way that, he came to the University of Louisville, I think he was sub 200 pounds, and now he's listed at 205. I'll have to go back and 190 pounds coming out of high school. He's added 15 pounds of muscle, and you can tell. And he's really, really taken that transformation seriously. First year didn't really get a lot of time. Second year broke out on the scene. Third year, well, the rest is history. And I think the fourth year is going to spell even more levels of development for him. I'm really excited to see what Ben Perry is going to be able to do. Has that skill set to where you can deploy him in so many different ways, whether it be in coverage, run defense, or also I think he showed at times his ability to sort of be like a pseudo pass rusher and being able to get after the quarterback. So Ben Perry is going to continue to be what Louisville needs in that star role, which is a versatile linebacker with defensive back skills that can play all over the field and affect the team or affect the game in many different ways. So Perry will undoubtedly be somewhere in our top 15 player rankings coming up. Probably here in about a week or so is when we'll start that. But again, for Louisville to take that next step, I think that Perry also has to continue to get better and better, which I believe that he will do. I think that, at times you have to be better in coverage. At times you have to be better in reading the quarterback, which ultimately I think Perry is going to. I think this is a star potential season for him, no pun intended. A money year, sort of like with TJ Quinn. This could definitely be his final season at Louisville. He has 2 seasons left, and I am really, really excited to see what he's able to do. And he had his first career sack. I think it was against Virginia Tech against Kyron Drones, but 9 tackles against Kentucky, 6 against Notre Dame. This is going to be a fantastic season for Ben Perry. One of the larger surprises last season for the Cardinals defense was Antonio Watts. I didn't really know what to expect from Watts coming into last year because I didn't really know what role he was going to play. I didn't know if he was going to be a safety, which, shocker, he was listed as a safety coming out of high school, but he made that transition to the defensive back or to the linebacker spot where he's added a lot of muscle. I mean, he has made a huge transformation. Came to Louisville at 185, and now he's at 225. And the native of Columbus, Georgia, really hadn't played much outside of last season. And then he broke out for 30 tackles, a forced fumble, 1 sack. Really hard-hitting linebacker that you could see situations to where Perry and Watts might see the field at the same time, because I think Watts is a little bit better in terms of defending the rush, as Perry, is a little bit superior in pass coverage. Watts could end up being a pretty decent pass rusher to where, at the moment he has 1 sack. I could see him tripling that number this year and getting 3 off our opportunity when you have Ashton Gelati and Thor Griffith on your defensive line. But Watts is the guy that just jumped onto the scene so quickly. Everybody's like, hold on, let me check to see who that is. Oh, Antonio Watts. And it makes sense. Added 40 pounds of muscle. The size then met up with the violent pursuit. And, man, he laid some really solid hits this past season and made some big-time plays, made some clutch plays. That's the main thing for me. He made some clutch plays. He had that forced fumble against Virginia. that the Cardinals desperately needed. That sack, I believe it was the same play in which he had those. He had 4 tackles against Duke. He had 3 against Miami, 3 against Pittsburgh and Notre Dame. He's only scratching the surface of the type of player that he can be. And I think ultimately you're going to get to a spot to where it's going to be hard to keep him off the field, man. He's fantastic. And again, it's sort of a collective thing that if Louisville wants to get better on the defensive side of the ball, I think the linebacker core is going to play a huge role in doing that. So let's see what happens with his level of play. Unfortunately, he's sort of playing behind Ben Perry at the moment. However, I could see him in certain situations playing on the inside, whether it's the middle linebacker, the weak side, you name it. But ultimately, pretty interested to see how this will unfold for him moving forward. But one key aspect of the linebacker room that I am impressed with that people are overlooking, it's the depth, the quality depth, specifically at the inside linebacker spot. You have 3 guys that I think that are going to play a good amount of snaps, whether it be inside or for one of these players as an edge. But 3 guys that will play a role for this team moving forward. We'll tell you about who those players are here on the next segment. Today's episode of the show is also brought to you by FanDuel. We're in the dog days of summer, the end of July. Thankfully, the Olympics is coming up, but I mean, NBA is done. MLB is really the only sport that's going on at the moment, along with WNBA. But nonetheless, FanDuel continually lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. I'll tell you, Angel Reese, she's a walking double-double. And if you're not betting that on FanDuel, you're probably not doing it right. Because her averages on FanDuel, her projections, are almost always lower than what they end up being. And I've included those numbers in my WNBA parlays, which my fandom for WNBA has grown with Reese and Caitlin Clark, and just watching, that league grow has been awesome. Check out all the WNBA odds on FanDuel. You can go to FanDuel.com to claim your big win. And heading into the final segment of this Saturday edition of Locked On Louisville, there's a lot of depth on this linebacker position preview that doesn't really get talked about a ton. And this name, TJ Capers, who we're about to talk about, he does get talked about. And we mentioned him in the edge rusher position preview because at this point I'm not really sure what the objective or what the projection is going to look like for him. I know that he sort of got publicly called out by his coaches early on in the spring over maybe a lack of work ethic, and then he proved people wrong all throughout the offseason. So I'm not really worried about TJ Capers this season, but he's finally healthy. Again, he's one of the most talented players on this defense. What's that role going to look like? Is he going to be sort of that Leo role where he's playing on the edge, or is he going to slide into that middle linebacker spot? Because even when he committed, everyone was kind of wondering, well, what kind of linebacker is he? Is he going to be more of a pass rush specialist, or does he have the skill set to play in the middle? And I think you couldn't go wrong either way. I think he has the skill set to do both. It's just a matter of how, what's going to allow him to see the field quicker. I think Capers has an exceptional amount of speed, an exceptional amount of pursuit, ability to cover sideline to sideline, and having good size too. So Capers definitely is featured into this conversation. And who knows how that ends up turning out for him. I think it's going to be one of the situations to where Jeff Brohm, Ron English, and company do what they can to find him a spot on the field. I'm not sure what that looks like at the moment, but I think it will depend on who you're playing, what the situations are. I do think he's going to see time on the field this season. It's just a matter of in what role. There are two transfers that will be featured in the two deep, in my opinion. One of those guys is Jurriente Davis, who started out his career at Middle Tennessee State, had 71 tackles, went to Jackson State, had 39, and then transferred to Texas A&M. Really didn't play a ton, only had 6 total tackles, took a step back. Now, he was playing on a very potent defense led by Edger and Cooper in that linebacking room. So sort of just got overshadowed. I do think that Davis has the talent at 6 foot, 230 pounds from Greensboro, North Carolina. Has looked good in spring ball and has impressed the coaching staff. And it's a situation to where I'm not sure if he starts over Stanquan Clark. I do think that if there's one guy to compete for that starting role, it's going to be Jurriente Davis. So that's just something to focus on, is whether or not, he can get past Stanquan in or on the depth chart with a solid fall camp. Could be a guy that you look for in fall camp. But again, the skill set is there. The pursuit is there. He's got the speed. That's something that I continually reemphasize and reiterate over and over and over, is just the speed that you need at the linebacker spot to be able to seal the edge, to be able to go sideline to sideline, to be able to contain mobile quarterbacks and be able to limit the big plays. So Davis is definitely an option that's going to see some time. The other one is sort of a late addition, and I understand why he's not being talked about a ton. That is Dan Foster Jr. Spent his last season at Texas State, 6'3", 225 pounds. He has a great amount of size. Started all 13 games with the Bobcats, was the 5th leading tackler on the team with 52. He had the 4th most solo tackles at 27, had 3.5 tackles for loss, a forced fumble, and a fumble recovery. He started his career at Marshall, didn't really play a ton over 4 years, and transferred to Texas State, where he had a little bit of a breakout. Being able to add Dan Foster to the team feels like a depth move from Jeff Brohm. One of those late additions where he looks at the roster and is like, what could we use? We just lost Jalen Alderman. So why don't we go out and bring in a linebacker who might not start, which we don't need them to, but if we call his number, he's going to be able to come in and still be able to, produce at a decent level. And he's a very violent hitter. Really good at defending the run. I think that's going to be his calling card at Louisville, is defending the run. I'm not necessarily so sure how good he's going to be in coverage in the ACC. He could be pretty solid, but at this point, we just don't know. So there's a lot of depth with TJ Capers, Jurriente Davis, Dan Foster. Those asking about Trent Carter, incoming freshman from Jacksonville, I think that this is a redshirt year for him, or at the very, I wouldn't say at the very most, but if he's not redshirting, it's because he's playing a good amount on special teams. But in my opinion, he's definitely going to be a redshirt candidate for the Cardinals this season, which is nothing wrong with that. So on tomorrow's episode of the show, we are continuing into our final position previews. It will be the cornerbacks room. Quincy Riley, the main topic of conversation. Jeff Brohm and company going to have a really good cornerbacks room. We'll discuss on tomorrow's episode of the show. Everyone have a great day. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here tomorrow.